types of responsibilities. Oh, sorry about that, if that may.
I apologize.
Okay. I didn't know whether it could have been my computer. I don't know who did that. Okay, but anyway, so in general, a personal relationship to someone gives rise to special responsibilities, different types of responsibilities corresponding to different types of relationships. For example, a generic friendship grounds certain responsibilities to one's friend. A teacher-student relationship generates responsibilities to a student, and a doctor-patient relationship to a patient, and so on. Some philosophers argue that the relationship gives rise, that a personal relationship, that relationships in general give rise to special responsibilities only if those relationships have been voluntarily assumed, so that in effect, special responsibilities only exist if they have been at least implicitly consented to. However, it seems clear that not all special responsibilities arise from someone's having voluntarily assumed them, or on the basis of voluntarily entering a relationship that brings with it special responsibilities. Children have special responsibilities to their parents, even though they did not voluntarily assume such responsibilities or voluntarily enter into that relationship to begin with. Or suppose I am watching television at home one night and the doorbell rings. I answer it and find a baby on the doorstep and no one in sight who might have left the baby. In that case, I find myself with a special responsibility, not perhaps a responsibility to raise the child all the way to adulthood, but I now do have a special responsibility to this child, and that responsibility is based on my being in the right place at the right time, that is, on a special connection to that child, though I did not voluntarily assume that connection. The general reason behind this point, I believe, can be at least partly understood as follows. Human persons are not mere isolated individuals whose fulfillment is merely individualistic. On the contrary, although I am a distinct individual with distinct interests and rights, at the same time, I am by nature a member of various communities. That is, being connected or united with others in various ways, being a member of various communities is part of who I am. Thus, my own well-being, my own flourishing in the well-being of other persons with whom I am united. And so my general moral responsibilities based on flourishing in some way become specified partly by voluntarily entering into communion with other people, but also by having or acquiring various types of connections or unions with other people in ways that are anterior to my voluntarily assuming or consenting to such connections. Now, some of those connections or unities are biological in nature. Much of our culture denies the importance of the bodily part of human persons. Indeed, many in our culture view the body as a mere instrument, extrinsic to the self, or even as a kind of raw stuff that lacks in any inherent meaning, upon which therefore we can impose any meaning we choose. However, the human body is an integral part of the human person and has an objective structure, or the whole person has an objective structure. For the human person is both a bodily being and has a spiritual component as part of him or her. The human body is not a mere extrinsic instrument. Therefore, a bodily connection or union is personal. When I write a sentence on a piece of paper, it is obvious that it is the same I, the same agent that moves the pencil with my fingers and that thinks out what to say with that writing. And I do that with my consciousness or my mind. But the agent that does things with his fingers, with bodily organs, is a bodily being. So the agent that does things with this consciousness is not a distinct agent from the thing that is moving the pencil with his fingers. Therefore, what I am is a single living bodily being with consciousness, with understanding, with intellect, not a consciousness that inhabits a body or possesses a body as if it were a mere extrinsic instrument. So because the body is an integral part of the person, in a way, the avenue for expressing myself in a personal way, bodily connections do have inherent personal significance. And we become bodily aware of this point, at least implicitly in many contexts. After the mother has given birth and she is getting ready to go home from the hospital, the nurses do not simply give her whatever baby happens to be nearest the door. Rather, they are careful to make sure that the mother goes home with her own biological baby. Bodily connections matter. This point is also clear in sexual contexts. There are, of course, different views about sexual morality, but almost all people are selective about who they will have sex with, requiring, for example, that they at least know and like who they have sex with. This fact is best explained by awareness that bodily sexual activity carries with it or demands in some way a personal connection to go with the close bodily union or connection realized in sexual activity. Sexual activity involves a close bodily connection. When a man and a woman have sex, they have a very thoroughgoing bodily union. The man and the woman become truly bodily united. This fact and our awareness of it, at least on some level, explains why sexual activity has an inherent personal significance. Again, biology does matter. So a close union with another, in some cases a bodily union, grounds a special responsibility to that person. Now, there is a very close bodily union of the parents to their children. Although it is wrong to say that the human embryo or fetus is merely a part of the woman's body, or the child is a distinct, actively growing individual human being, still the relationship between mother and child is one of physical continuity or prolongation. There is a unique biological unity or continuity of children to their parents. The parents become bodily one in their sexual act, and their biological union gives rise to and is prolonged in the child. Thus, the mother and the father and their unity are, in a sense, prolonged and continued in their offspring. The child comes to be from the bodily parts, the sex cells, the gametes that come from the mother and the father. The body of the new child was just moments before parts of the mother and of the father. The child coming to be from the union of the sex cells, from the father and from the mother. The child also receives from the union of those sex cells a genetic code that provides the fundamental individual blueprint for the active self-development of the child all the way to her mature stage. So although the baby is not literally a part of the mother or the father, or at least not a mere part, the baby has a strong and very thoroughgoing biological union with both the mother and with the father. Viewing this relationship from the standpoint of the new child, we can see that the baby's specific and individual identity, who she is as a body-soul person, is bound up with her connection or union with her mother and her father. Children, of course, come into the world in a very needy condition. They need nurturing, love, and direction. Now, who they are, their unique personal identity, is in part constituted by their connection to their own biological parents. And children have a need, and therefore children have a need for the love and care of their parents, not just some parents or other, but their own parents. If the parents, one or both of them, die or abandon the child, other individuals may step in and assume at least many of the parental responsibilities. And in that case, they would be real, not substituted parents. Nevertheless, the child would still be deprived of something important, namely the love and care of her own biological parents. In sum, we have a special responsibility to those people with whom we have a close personal union. And we often have a special responsibility to those whose urgent needs we are in an especially apt position to fulfill. But we do have a very intimate and thoroughgoing union that is fully personal with our children. And they have, in turn, a special need for the love and the care we as their parents can provide. Therefore, we have a special responsibility to our children. Note that what the child needs, and so what the parents have a special responsibility to provide, is not just that the child be nurtured, cared for, and educated, but that the parents themselves be the ones who provide that care. The parent's responsibility to his or her child are not fully transferable to someone else. For example, as a father, I ought, if possible, attend my son's track meets. But I could not fulfill this responsibility by hiring someone else to go on in my place. Thus, there are two parts to a parent's responsibilities. First, he or she has a duty to ensure that the child receive care and education. But second, he or she has a duty to provide these himself or herself. Of course, the parents may enlist the assistance of others in providing for care and education for their children. Because of the limitations of their knowledge and skill, the need for at least one of them to work outside the home and their other responsibilities, the parents will inevitably need assistance from others, perhaps schools, tutors, and other role models. How much of this relying on help from others is appropriate and not a derogation of duty to provide personal care themselves will be a prudential matter. In any case, this outsourcing of some care to others is delegated responsibility and remains subsidiary to the parent's authority and responsibility. The special responsibility that one has to one's biological children is to be present as a mother and a father who will provide the child with the nurturing and directing, the directing of the child to his or her mature, fulfilled, and virtuous state, the direction that she specifically needs. In other words, the responsibility one has to one's children is a structured one and has definite content. It arises from the biological relationship to the child, and this responsibility is defined by the child's own good. His or her own full development, physically, emotionally, intellectually, morally, and religiously, to the stage where she can take on the task of the principal direction or government of her life for herself. What then should be said, but what should be said about the authority of the state? The state's authority in relationship to the child. The state's authority does not reach in every way into every aspect of a human being's fulfillment, although there are different views about what limits there are on the legitimate authority of the state. On any reasonable approach, the state is limited by the nature is at least limited by the nature of the intrinsic goods of the members of its community. That is, the state exists to protect and promote the genuine fulfillment or intrinsic basic goods of the members of that community and should respect the nature of those intrinsic goods. But as I have argued, the family is a natural and pre-political community, and it has an objective structure based on the nature of its own specific common good. And the family and their interrelationships that constitute the family is an intrinsic good and should be promoted and respected. So the state has a duty to respect the structure of the family. Now, in fact, the state acts beyond its authority whenever, or without a pressing reason, it substitutes its own judgment for that of the authorities in any pre-political community with respect to that community's proper end, if that is unnecessary. This is true even in regard to such a community as a chess club or a bakery. In the case of the family, an instance of a central intrinsic good integral to individual personal dignity, the state needs a very compelling reason to intrude. Thus, the state may rightly regulate the family's activities, but only when those activities involve a clear case of severe neglect or abuse of a child, or if they impact the broader common good. If the state intrudes and substitutes its own authority for the proper authority of the family, the state undermines the rightful authority of that in that family, and to that extent degrades and harms it. This is a serious harm in that the personal authority of the parents is vital for the cohesiveness of the family and for the child's well-being. In sum, the legitimate authority of the state is limited. The most proper role of the state in relation to the family is to set the conditions that facilitate families realizing their own genuine fulfillment. The family is a natural and pre-political community and is itself a distinct form of intrinsic good. It has an objective structure based on the nature of its own common good, which is the development and education of children to their true and mature fulfillment. So the state has a duty, except where abuse or public order and public safety absolutely require, not to intrude into the interior direction of the family, to respect the inherent authority of the families for that
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. Really interesting and valuable points on how we think about the balance between state and family rights. I will, as my co-chair often does, take moderator's privilege and ask our first question. I think we'll have a discussion here at this point. For those who want to ask a question, please feel free to use the reactions function at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and I'll call on you to ask any question, or you can also include a question in the chat if you would like. But while that's occurring, I'll start us off. I think one of the things that we are noticing around the world is this balance of misinformation and how to understand that information and engage with it in meaningful ways. Do you see the balance, kind of this harmonizing of parent and child rights within the context of a state's goals of bringing order and creating that larger society? Do you see that kind of evolving or changing as to how parents and the state need to harmonize? Or is it just a different mechanism and process that is addressed in the same kind of in the same way that it has been, and that you're suggesting is the ideal way for child education?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my inclination is to think that there is a change, that there's, and I do think that there should be a harmonization. So I don't want I'm sort of asserting a central role of the family here, and in some ways, by implication, downplaying the state role. But I do think that, as I said, I think that the state's role, that you see the state's primary role in relationship to the family as being subsidiary, is to facilitate its own kind of internal actions. Of course, there are exceptions where there's serious neglect or abuse, but and I would say, I guess the tendency, at least I would say, there's a drive toward government becoming larger and larger, and I think also a kind of a different view of what government should be. And sometimes it seems to me that the government is, there is sometimes a confusion of the role of the government with the role of the family. I don't think the role of the government we should see the role of the government as being to provide us with all the goods, or to take over to say, well, this is itself a family. I mean, it's I think it's so. I mean, there are different views of how to articulate what the basis is, the limits of the common good of the political community. But I would say at least that in relationship to the family, it should see itself as primarily wanting that the ideal should be subsidiary rather than as sort of in close managing regard.
Great, thank you.
I do think there's a movement away from that, I think.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting element as to how technology is impacting that balance between state and family and parental rights, or at least has the potential to do so. We are actually going to now pivot. Our second speaker is with us, Nuno Cristomo. So I'm going to introduce him now. We'll hear his comments and words, and then we'll open for all of our questions to both of our speakers for a full discussion. So Nuno Cristomo has worked for child welfare with various non-governmental organizations, with the Portuguese government, and from 2001 with UNICEF, most recently as an emergency specialist in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He has worked in more than 70 countries on 5 continents, helping save the lives of about 2 billion children. So we're honored and thrilled to have Nuno with us today. I'll yield the floor to you, Nuno.
Hi, good afternoon, Professor Freer. Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and also thank you very much for the colleagues, that invited me once again to share some thoughts, notably the NGO committee on the family, New York, Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, the World Youth Alliance, and the Universal Peace Federation. Thank you. The theme of the talk, harmonizing children's and parents' rights on children's education, and I found the concept note that was distributed, very, very pertinent. I've been working in this field for 33 years. So basically, I saw in these 33 years, that you mentioned in the concept note, from 1989 to today, I started late 88 anyway. So from the moment that the Convention on the Rights of Children was signed in 89, to today, the numbers speak to themselves, and these are numbers that are pretty much, accepted everywhere. I remember the book of late Professor Hans Rosling that already carried these numbers. It's quite an achievement. It has been a teamwork, has been a partnership. I really like, to emphasize this is exactly what is in the concept note, has been a partnership between parents in the first place, absolutely, governments, faith-based organizations. I know that I'm speaking to the convert, but I would like to emphasize that aspect, historically, so this gender parity that we have in front of us, that expressed by these numbers, has been a great achievement. There are challenges. There are challenges in front of us, as you mentioned in the concept note. One of them, obviously, it's quality of education, and I think we are reaching. I just spent 3 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm originally from Portugal, where I spent the last year or so on my retirement, and I see that not only because of the pandemic, but also the challenge of a quality education. Sometimes I witness that the parents are more qualified, to educate their children, than the teachers themselves, especially in the context of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and specifically also, in the context of the last almost 2 years of pandemic. So I know that homeschooling inside certain organizations, like the one I spent 20 years with, it's controversial, but I truly believe that every single crisis of this size and scope, it's an opportunity to advance other alternatives, notably, homeschooling. That is exactly what happened. We know exactly this happened, during the pandemic, in many situations. So what it does not change, in these situations, is the best possible outcome for the children, exactly like is stated in the concept note for this afternoon. So equitable education, inclusive, and the quality, of the education, it's essential, And again, I really want to emphasize, that this partnership, between the government, the parents, and faith-based organizations and other members of the society, it's essential to reach the best possible outcome for children. I'd like also to share, again, if I learned something in the last 33 years of my personal life, is some common sense apply to these situations. I remember when I started at UNICEF, our late colleague, very esteemed late colleague, Newton Bowles used to tell me, we are forgetting. So the emphasis when I started was girls' education, girls' education, girls' education. Fine, but Newton Bowles used to tell me we are forgetting the fathers, we are forgetting the boys, and this has practical implications. Just to give you an example, when I arrived in Lesotho in Southern Africa, girls' education was never a problem because it's a pastoralist society where the boys spend their time in the fields, except not going to school. So the problem in Lesotho was boys' education. Of course, nobody had the courage to go against the policy and to clarify that. So sometimes, it's really essential that we need to apply some common sense to the implementation of these policies. Right now, another example that I've been facing in the last year or so in Portugal. The case is in the local Supreme Court because parents refuse to send two children, to a required course that is called Education for Citizenship. It used to be optional during many years in Portugal, including the almost 48 years of dictatorship, and more recently it became required. So these parents, brought the case all the way to the Portuguese Supreme Court to dispute the requirement of attending a class that they do not accept to be imposed on their children. So again, just using two examples that some common sense needs to apply in this situation. What else can I share with you? I think that's it from my side. I'm open to questions. I'm open to clarifications. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and very honored to share the floor with such distinguished speakers as Dr. Lee and Professor Freer. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nuno. It's one of the things that I think we strive for so much in the NGO Committee on the Family is to have representation from those who are in the academic field, who study and examine, and those in the policy world who are in the weeds each day. And of course, I, as a fellow academic, believe that we're in the weeds as well. But it's so nice to have those different perspectives on how to engage and experience these types of issues. So I just want to first thank so much Dr. Lee and Nuno Cristomo for being our speakers today. Really wonderful. Special thanks to Dr. Lee, who many of you are aware stepped in for us on a late notice when Dr. Michela was unable to attend today. And you could never ask for a better short-term replacement that just brings so much expertise and knowledge to the question than Dr. Lee. So we're really fortunate to have been able to have such a wonderful event. I have already used my moderator's privilege of asking a question. And while those of you who know me know that I have many more questions that I'm happy to ask, I don't want to steal the thunder from the rest of our guests. So if anyone would like to ask our next question, you are free to raise your hand and I will acknowledge you. All right, so we have our first question from John Ketchum.
Hello, thank you to both Dr. Lee and Mr. Chrysostomou for speaking today. I'm a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, so a bit of the intersection of policy and academia. And I was just wondering how we ought to respond to those who would say that there is no pre-political unit of the family, that essentially the state confers power upon parents to exercise authority over their children, and that children really are atomized individuals worthy of specific rights distinct from those of their parents. Because it seems to me like if you're starting from that philosophical premise, then you're going to necessarily diverge from what we would espouse. And it might seem implausible I would agree that that view of the world is implausible, but enough people, I suppose, have it to merit consideration on how we ought to respond to it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dr. Lee, would you like to take the first crack at the question?
Yes, I very good question. I think that that's true. There's a tendency maybe on some to kind of discount the existence of these pre-political communities. I guess that was the first point I might make, just briefly, is that we know, I think we know by experience that there are other pre-political communities besides the family to begin with: friendships, chess clubs, study clubs, schools. There are many. Human beings are social by nature, and we don't. The political community is not the only community, and so that there are other. I think the political community is in a way more artificial than most of the other ones that we form. So I think then once we get around to forming a political community, I think the basic difference is I would say it's something like, when you go into a region, you need to have a kind of overarching authority with the possibility of coercion that sort of marks off the political community from other ones that are already there, sort of that we weren't necessarily, logically speaking, waiting for the existence of a state or a political community to form. So then I would say that, okay, the political community is, what's the point of that? I think the point of that is to do, why do we need that? I mean, we already form a lot of communities before we get to the level of the state, such as friendships and study clubs, athletic communities, all that. Why do we need the state? I think the state is because there are certain things that we can't do at sort of at these other levels. So then I would say that my argument would be that the state should only do what you can't do at the sort of pre-political level. And so I think what we want the state to do is to kind of facilitate and to kind of provide protection and that we as a community can't do at these lower levels. So I would say it's kind of limited to what we can't do at other levels. So, but I would say that even if one doesn't accept that kind of strong sort of limitation, that's kind of strong view of the limitations of the state. Certainly, the state should be respectful of all of those communities, and then the next step would be to argue, well, then here's a natural. There are certain communities that sort of naturally form that are based on these natural union. That would be the direction which I'd go with that.
Great, thank you, Dr. Lee. Nuno, do you have any thoughts as well?
Thank you, Professor Freer. Absolutely, I totally agree with Dr. Lee. And from my experience, sometimes in the context I've been working in the last 33 years, the state is even absent, non-existent. So I totally agree, with the thoughts that was just shared by Dr. Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts or questions? If we need a moment to think, I can certainly. Oh, Lynn, thank you.
Hi, this has been excellent. I hope I can ask this right. In developed countries, I'm wondering about workism and if parents have sort of slid into thinking that having a job is more important than family. And, is part of the problem that when parents, it's easy to kind of, well, education, I'll let the government or let, the officials take care of that, and I'll provide money. And I'm just, anyway, I think you have my question. Are we partly at fault for forgetting, the unique responsibilities that parents have to their children? I think that's my question.
Nuno, do you want to take that first, and then we'll try and be equitable in how we start our responses?
Absolutely, Professor Freer. I think Lynn is totally right, and again, these last 2 years, really brought this very close to home. It really laid on our doorsteps, the importance of the family and the importance of striking a balance between a professional life and a family life. I think has been absent, in the last century or so, especially, as Lynn mentioned, in the developed world. That's my share. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. Dr. Lee?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point about workism. I guess there's a tendency on all our parts to think that something is important only if it's sort of publicly or sort of maybe on social media now or various ways sort of publicized or noticed by a lot of people or something like that. And I think that's just simply a factual mistake. I think it's there are various goods of the human person is a very complex thing, complex being, and there are various aspects of our well-being, and we have to, I think, realize try to fight against sort of taking one of those goods and exalting it and making it the only thing worthwhile, and everything else is just subservient to that. And I think the kind of the technological, the public, the outside world, as it were, there's so much of a tendency to take that as worthwhile. It is worthwhile, but to take something worthwhile and then exalt it above everything else, we all have a tendency to do that, and I think our culture has kind of gone that direction.
Great, thank you. We've got a question from another audience member, so I'm going to move my seat.
Hello, my name is Sophia Pietzuk, and I'm the Director of Advocacy at World Youth Alliance. Thank you, everyone, for being on this call, and it was really great to hear from our two speakers today. So I had a question on just the fact that I think around the world, parents have different ideas about what children can and can't do. And I was looking at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and there is a section that talks about children having the right to peaceful assembly. And I looked at the reservations on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and lots of countries, signed the convention, but said like, okay, these rights to assembly, rights to express the opinion, and all these kind of like civil and political rights that are given to children. Lots of states really said that this should come with parental supervision. And so I guess my question is like, how do we strike a balance? Because here I can very much see here in the United States there is definitely a culture of giving children the spotlight to speak for themselves. And just recently, if we look at COP26, Greta Thunberg is front and center speaking as a child. And but what is the balance that we should strike about what children can and can't do? And yeah, I guess that's my question.
Dr. Lee, Dr. Lee, would you like to start us off?
I'm going to be brief on this because it's not something I've given a lot of thought to. I apologize about that. But I guess, there's a certain, there's an immaturity on the part of children, and that's what we mean by child. And so I don't think there's any insult to them by saying that, well, we're not going to defer to their authority in the same way in which we might to someone who studied these and things. Of course, I'm not great on deferring to a lot of different authorities anyway, but still, I don't think it's any kind of an insult to say that we're going to give you a forum and really want to listen to your the depth of your experience once you have some experience. So you know, that's just something off the cuff. I think we want to emphasize. I think when we're educating a child, we want to emphasize sort of active their own kind of gradually taking over and directing their own life. That's sort of the goal. But it is a gradual thing, and so I share that kind of concern about the need for parental supervision. I mean, that when there's a right to right to assembly, I first thought about, okay, well, we got to let these kids go out and play. That was my first thought. But I think maybe they had in mind some of these more political things, you know. But I'm all for asserting the right of children to go out and play and ride bicycles and so forth.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Nuno, any thoughts on this aspect of?
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor Freer. Yes, just a couple of thoughts. I think essentially, I know the convention. Obviously, I totally, accept certain limitations, but also I'd like to emphasize that we need to differentiate. So I know children is up to 18, but we need to differentiate. And I think in terms of these political rights for children, the work in the last few years, and actually this goes across the board, is focused on adolescents. I see, one of the questions have been, in discussion is to lower the voting age, not only in the developing countries, where in certain circumstances, 50% of the population is below 18, 50%. So half of the society is below 18. So if we don't address a way to represent, and also, in the context where life expectancy is 36, so I think it's another factor that we need to be in consideration. But even in a country like Switzerland, here in Europe, has been some talk of lowering the voting age to 16. Of course, totally agree with Dr. Lee. A child is a child, and the right, to play and to have, a regular, childhood. It's obviously, it takes precedent over any political rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. It strikes me, the question strikes me on something that I thought about in carrying over from last month's meeting is kind of the role of culture within the balance of parent and child rights and the role of government. Is there a line, or is there a minimum expectation that the government should be setting for child education? I think of this in the context of gender, right? There are many cultures that view educational rights differently and expectations for male and female children. Is there a role in the government to kind of clarify the desire for equality between the genders? Is that something that should be the domain of the parents to determine? How do we, I'm just thinking of a very specific example. How do we see that playing out in this context? Maybe Dr. Lee to take it first, and then we'll ask Dr. Nuno.
Well, I think that I think they can set. I think the state can set some general parameters that facilitate the working of the family, but I think they still have to defer to the authority of the family. I think we had in the United States, we had the famous case of Yoder, Wisconsin versus Yoder, where the Amish, that their practice was to require the students, require their children to go to school, only allow them to go to school up to 16, I think it was, and then I think Wisconsin was requiring them to go to 18. I think maybe it was lower than that, but okay, so it was how long they would go to school. And so, and the Supreme Court found, I think rightly, I think they decided rightly that you know, we have to allow the parents to make this decision, that we have to defer to the authority of the family. It's not the role of the state to come in and make all those decisions. There's a freedom of religion and a freedom of self-determination on the part of the family. And I think one of the upshots of that is going to be that sometimes maybe, you know, some families are going to make some decisions that we think are not the best. And I think it has to be, there is a balancing act. It'd have to be something like a clear abuse before the state would intervene. Now, where to draw that line is going to be another, that's going to be a tricky thing. And I don't have a, you know, clear cut, I don't know, I don't have a clear-cut idea about exactly how to draw that line, you know, that's a bright line, but I think there has to be that balance, and the state has to be ready to say that well, we're going to have to stand back and allow some families to make decisions that we would not think are correct.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Nuno?
Yes, Professor Freer. So on this one, you know, I'd like to stick with the facts. You know, the numbers that are in the concept note speak for itself. You know, I mean, we are basically reaching parity between, you know, girls and boys in terms of education. You know, what is missing is obviously the last mile. You know, the 10, you know, the last percentile. You know, the 10% or so. And again, you know, I will stick to the balance. You know, I think it is not advancing the best outcome for the children, you know, if we forcibly impose anything, either the state or some other entity. So I think that type of balance, you know, it's important. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Marcia, I see that you've posted a question in the chat. Would you like me to read it, or do you want to expand on your thought there?
If it's not clear, Ben, I mean, you can go ahead and read it, and then if it's not clear enough, I can expand.
Oh, I think it's clear. I just wanted to make sure that which way you would prefer. So Marcia wrote, Ruth Safin has written on the topic of abandoning children to their rights. Its premises, children are not autonomous individuals. They do need significant direction and engagement more than an adult. If that is the case, it becomes a question of whom should be given priority in giving that direction and engagement, the parents or government. Because it will be engagement for one of those two entities, would it not be the case that the mischief or misuse is more likely to come from the government, who would have the most vested in the child and therefore care the most about the child? And this raises an issue that I'm always thinking about as well as, and I think Dr. Lee, you brought this up really nicely before, is this an issue of a kind of dichotomy of either family and parents or government, or what is the blend of parent and government action in that? But I will of course let you speak to your thoughts on Marcia's question.
Well, I mean, I think the first, I think that there's this question about, well, you know, who decides. That's another way of putting the question is who decides. Okay, so we have the you know, the child. Should the child go to high school, or should the child not go to high school? What, you know, is the state going to decide this, or are the parents going to decide this? And I think the child has. It's the child's interest, but the child's interest have to be determined. I think, you know, that they can't, you know, you have to kind of figure out who's going to make that call to begin with. And I think that the child has a need for the love and the care of her own parents, first of all. And so if she already has this, she's already in this relationship, she's already in this close-knit community and needs that care and the love, and she needs to have a respect for her parents. So I think in general, the tilting goes toward the family rather than the government when there's a disagreement, because they're close in on the other side, and on the other side, the child has a need. It has a need for the intactness of that family. If the government comes in and when the government intrudes into it, substitutes its judgments for the judgments of the authority in the family, then it's, in a way, it's eroding that family. Now, to erode that family is to harm the child. Now, in some cases, if it's a case of clear-cut abuse or severe neglect, that might be necessary. But I think that because of that kind of intactness of that natural community that is there and that has to be respected as good for both the parents as well as for the children, but especially the children, there, I think that the sort of the tipping has to go toward the parents. The other thing is, I mean, we can, I mean, the government is several layers removed from the child. So there's a lot to be said, I think, in terms of tilting in favor of the family in general, I think.
Thank you. Nuno, your thoughts?
Absolutely. I totally understand, the question from our colleague Marcia, and the example that the Dr. Lee presented, in terms of the children going to high school or not, has been an ongoing discussion in the last 33 years of my professional life. Certain organizations, I will not name them, could not even being willing to discuss vocational schools, technological professional schools. So basically it was it still is very, very challenging if we diverge from high school, higher education, and so sometimes there are different paths, and sometimes I think the family knows better what is the capacity of the child, or to follow, which type of path to follow. So again, yes, you really need. We really need to apply some common sense on these decisions, and do not put limitations that are in detriment of the best outcome for the children. Thank you.
Thank you. And Marcia followed that question up with, there's often, if the default is to the government as the primary decision maker, there's often those who make that choice often have the assumption that the government must be kind of neutral in the decision making of what's in the child's needs or interests, but that relies on the expectation that the government is in fact neutral. Do you believe that the government can actually be neutral in making decisions about child education, or could we imagine that the government would have its own potentially agenda in the education of those children? Nuno, would you like to begin a response to that question?
On that one, honestly, I cannot respond. I'm not the government. I cannot really respond to this one.
Okay.
It's really a matter of policy. I think probably changes from country to country. But yeah, that one I cannot really. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. Dr. Lee?
Well, I think oftentimes how the child should be educated, what direction to go to, depends a lot upon some basic beliefs, such as what is the human person, what's the destiny of the human person, is there a God, what we say the good life is. And I think each of us has a duty, a responsibility to try to figure out what's true about basic moral matters and about whether there's a God, and what our basic responsibilities in life are. And I think that's something that we have. It's a kind of voluntary choice, and so can be only made at the level of the individual, or if it's a child who's not yet at the stage where he or she can make that decision for himself or herself, then I think they are naturally in the care of their parents. So I think there's a matter of sort of basic religious freedom or freedom of conscience there that has to be taken into account of, and for the state to kind of take that over is really a violation of one of the natural rights to go so far as to say, well, we are going to kind of take over the fundamental direction of the child. That's violating, I think, the right to freedom of religion and the exercise of religion and the right to conscience. I think.
Great, thank you so much. Do we have any other questions for our two wonderful speakers? I think it's can be challenging sometimes to identify questions when our speakers have kind of illustrated and displayed such masterful knowledge of how this relationship between parent and child education. I see Lynn Walsh has another question for our speakers.
Thank you. This may be a little bit redundant for what the young lady from Wyotes asked, but I just, in developing countries, I see there's so much emphasis on rights, and certainly children are being told, you know, you have rights. And I think there's always should be a balance of responsibility, but it is part of the problem. We're focusing so much on individual rights of children when, you know, the responsibility has become responsible citizens to the world and have good relationships and, you know, respect society, and so that they can contribute. So it's part of the problem. We're focusing so much, especially on children's rights. Anyway, I will leave that at that.
Dr. Lee, would you like to respond first?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I guess if there's a way of doing that, I think of where I think if the notion of rights sort of, if you conceive of a right as sort of leading you down the path and looking at someone as sort of already kind of cut off or already individual, only an individual and already fully capable of making their own decisions for themselves, then I think that, yeah, that's a mistake. I think on the other side of it, I think if you set up the idea of a right as sort of what corresponds to a responsibility, then I think we have a responsibility to these children, but I think, and then reciprocal of that is a right on the part of the child for us to fulfill that responsibility. So, but I think one of the rights the child has is not to be treated as if they are isolated individuals who are already capable of making their decisions for themselves, I guess. So I'm sorry, I'm sort of playing around with the verbiage there, but I think that this whole question about how to conceive of rights and the relationship between rights and responsibilities, a lot of times it presupposes a certain view of rights that already builds into it a kind of individual excessive individualism, and that would be the way I would sort of begin to respond to that.
Great, thank you so much.
In other words, I think I agree with, I think what you were suggesting, Lynn, or moving toward is that sometimes this emphasis upon children's rights already presupposes sort of cutting them away from the family. I think that's building into it a kind of a begging of the question.
Great, thank you, Dr. Lee. Nuno, do you have any thoughts as well?
Yeah, exactly. I think where the issue stands. First of all, let me say once again, I really believe there are universal rights. I think that's, I think we are all, in the same line here. No, what I cannot accept is, and I think Lynn is totally right. I mean, I will not name the countries, but there are countries who sign any conventions without being capable to uphold anything. And that I have a problem. Much more so than with the country that again I will not name, who declines to sign certain optional protocols because there are no conditions to uphold what is there. So I totally respect that. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So do we have any other questions or considerations that we'd like to raise? Oh, yes, Victoria, one of our recent joinees. Yeah, thank you, Victoria. You're on mute. There we go.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm finding this so fascinating to hear everything that you both are saying. So thank you for welcoming me here. My question is more about the roles of, these three bodies in the education of a child. The government, from my perspective and from what I'm hearing you both say, is kind of the, they establish the expectations and the system of education, in terms of curriculums and systems and those kinds of things. And the parents are more of like a mediator, they kind of help enforce that system by encouraging their children to go to school, helping them process the information they're taught, those kinds of things. And then the role of the child really, from the way I'm kind of understanding it, has to be more about personal engagement and motivation to engage in what they're being taught. And I'm wondering, in the way that you see our system currently designed, how we can encourage children themselves to take more ownership over their education, whether that's within the system, as it's designed, or making adjustments to, the systems that we have, or just adjustments to that role in and of itself. Just curious about all of your thoughts on that.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. We'll we'll start with Nuno this time for your thoughts and response to Victoria's question.
Sure, Professor Freire. Yeah. Thank you, Victoria, for all the three topics that you touched. In my view, again, I see this as since the beginning of this event, I've been emphasizing, I see this as a partnership between the family, the government, the faith-based organization, other societal, communities. So I see this as a partnership of equals, where we share the responsibility, and the responsibility of educating and raising a child. Now, there are, during the last 33 years of my life, there has been instances and mechanisms where there has been children's participation in these processes, in terms of curriculum, in terms of, parliament, the children's parliament. So there has been, several instances where, mechanisms were created, to give a voice, and to share, the concerns, That's what I have to tell you now.
Great. Thank you, Nuno. Dr. Lee?
I understand the direction of the question. I think this question about, I guess, a question about curriculum and sort of family's role or parental role in educational curriculum is that, I guess that's the direction of the, or that's the substance of the question. And I think it's a complex issue, but I think we can look at it again on terms of say like religious freedom, kind of, as sometimes these issues raise questions about religious freedom. If I send my kid to a public school, then I think that that the teacher, then I have a right, I think, to say that, well, I don't think that that the teacher should be teaching things contrary to what sort of the major religions hold. I think that if they're violating, if they're teaching, say, that there is no God, or they're teaching that there are no objective moral norms, or things that are really violate basic points of my religion or worldview, then I think I have a right to voice that. I think the other educators have delegated authority. I don't think they're the primary authority. I think that they have the authority they have is delegated to them from the parents. And so the parents have a right to intervene. Now, there can be issues about, maybe if the parents disagree among themselves, then things get more complex. But so that's a general thing. I think, if you bring in the issue about a basic worldview or religions, then some of the sort of issues, well, does the parent have the right to dictate every aspect of the curriculum? Well, no. I mean, the parent may not have the basic knowledge of, say, United States history or basic knowledge of chemistry in order to do that. But I think the parent does have a right to insist that their basic religious views or not be sort of attacked. And so that's where I think maybe moving it over into an issue of question about religious freedom or question about sort of basic worldview, then I think is maybe helpful about in these issues, in these kind of questions.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Lee. Lynn, is that a new hand that's up? Yes, okay.
Sorry to dominate the questions, but this is a great discussion. I'm wondering, generally when we say education, there's sort of an assumption we're talking about academic education, but really we need to be concerned about a holistic education, moral education, how to be a conscientious citizen, and how to have good relationships. If we fail in that area, the child as an adult is not going to do well. And I wonder, again, if we're sliding away too much at focusing on academic education, where we need to see what, in terms of the well-being of children, helps them become a whole human being. And if they don't learn good relationships, and that's learned primarily in the family, then we're really not concerned about the child as a whole. So is that part of the problem? We're thinking too much academics.
Interesting question, yeah. Thank you, Lynn. Dr. Lee, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, well, I think I'm probably guilty of tending to think of things sort of on the academic almost primarily. I don't know why that would be so, but I think that, I think that's a very important point, because I think the child already has this, by the time he or she goes to school, the child already has kind of a very intimate personal relationship with his or her parents, and then so the other relationships that come in, and we do want, we want maybe coaches, we want, other friends, we do want some help, we do want some assistance and sort of that moral and that personal kind of relational education. But on the other hand, it by the nature of the case, it can't be, it's going to only be subsidiary. The parental thing is already there, sort of the broader context for these other relational and moral sort of education occurring. So I think that's another sort of indication of why sort of you really do need to have school and the state seeing itself as subsidiary rather than as sort of like even on an equal plane. I think there should be a harmony, but I would, but I think they have to see themselves as subsidiary. And
Thank you. Nuno, any thoughts as well for Lynn's question and comment?
Yes, I think a very good point, Lynn. I think this holistic approach, to the education is very important. Absolutely. The family, the extended family, the community, the faith-based organizations, anything that's integrates the normal, cycle of life of the children have an impact on the education, not only the academics. Absolutely. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we are approaching our 2 o'clock time, and if we don't have any additional questions, I think it is certainly appropriate for all of us to enjoy an extra 8 minutes to our lives. I'm sure we all have many things going on. So again, I want to thank Dr. Lee and Nuno Cristomo for speaking with us today. I also want to mention that Nuno is a longtime friend of the NGO Committee on the Family. We hope that Dr. Lee will become one now after his experience with us today. My experience with Nuno is it's funny. I think of Nuno as a long-time friend and colleague, although I've only had the occasion to speak with him on a few occasions. So it really is amazing how quickly we can make connections and bonds with each other, even from long distances. So I look forward to continuing for all of you to bond with the rest of the NGO Committee on the Family and seeking our goals to support the family throughout the world and at the United Nations to best support society. So thank you again for all of your time and energy and thoughts today. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event, our holiday traditions, which we'll be sending out information about in the coming weeks. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.